You know that moment when your whole world shifts? When someone you love says something so cruel that it rewrites your entire future. Mine happened on a golf course in front of my father's friends. What started as public humiliation became the spark that drove me to buy the very club where he tried to destroy me. But here's the twist I never saw coming. The revenge I thought I wanted wasn't the victory I actually needed. Just before you continue to watch, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage and help us keep creating amazing content for you. All right, back to the story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the fairway as I gripped my 9-iron, trying to ignore the laughter behind me. Dad stood with his usual crew of successful business owners, their polo shirts crisp and their attitudes sharper. I had been excited when he invited me to play at Willowbrook Country Club, thinking maybe we could finally bond over something. Instead, I watched him gesture toward me like I was some kind of zoo exhibit. "Watch this," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Kid thinks he's going to make it big with his little computer business." The group chuckled politely, but Dad wasn't finished. He walked closer, his voice carrying across the green. "You'll never succeed without me. Mark my words, you'll come crawling back begging for help within 6 months." The laughter hit like shards of glass in my chest, sharp, cold, and impossible to ignore. I forced a weak smile, nodding like some grateful puppet, but inside, something snapped. Not enough to break me, but enough to leave a permanent crack where the shame could seep in. The perfectly trimmed grass under my feet no longer felt solid. It shifted like quicksand, pulling me down with every fake laugh I gave. And right then, it clicked. This wasn't bonding. This was a firing squad disguised as a golf course. The ride home was worse than the public humiliation. Dad turned the radio down and launched into his favorite lecture about realistic expectations and knowing your place. He compared me to his golf buddies, men who owned real businesses, not computer nonsense like mine. Every red light became another opportunity for him to explain why I was destined to fail. "Marcus owns 3 restaurants," he said, tapping the steering wheel. "Jim's construction company employs 40 people. What do you have? A laptop and dreams." His voice dripped with disappointment, like I was personally responsible for ruining his reputation. I stared out the window, watching suburban houses blur past. Each one probably held families who supported each other, who celebrated small wins instead of predicting failures. The silence between his words felt heavier than the criticism itself. By the time we reached home, I had made a decision that would change everything. The humiliation was done, but the real battle was just beginning. I could feel something shifting inside me, a quiet determination taking root where shame used to live. That evening, I swallowed my pride and tried one last time. I found him in his study, surrounded by the awards and photos that decorated his successful career. I asked him, quietly and respectfully, if he would mentor me instead of mocking me. Maybe share some of his business wisdom instead of just pointing out my flaws. He looked up from his newspaper like I had interrupted something important. "You want me to babysit your little hobby?" The words hit harder than any golf club to the chest. "I've got real responsibilities, not time to hold your hand through whatever phase this is." And with that, he cut me off. Not just emotionally, but financially too. No more allowance for gas money, no more family cell phone plan, no more safety net. I was 24 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was completely on my own. The fear was terrifying, but the freedom was intoxicating. Standing in that doorway, watching him return to his newspaper like I didn't exist, I felt something die and something else be born. The son who needed his approval was gone. What remained was a man who would have to create his own path. I started taking night shifts at a local warehouse, loading trucks until my back ached and my hands were raw. During the day, I worked on my business, building websites for small companies who couldn't afford the big agencies. Every dollar I earned felt like rebellion, like proof that I could survive without his approval. The work was brutal, but it was mine. No lectures about realistic expectations, no comparisons to his successful friends. Just me, a laptop, and the growing belief that maybe I could actually do this. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, coffee became my best friend, and slowly, my client list began to grow. My first month's earnings barely covered rent and ramen noodles, but I had never felt prouder of any paycheck. I kept the stub taped to my bathroom mirror, a daily reminder that I was building something real, something that belonged to me alone. The warehouse guys started calling me college boy when they found out about my side business. Some meant it as mockery, but others seemed genuinely impressed that someone was hustling for something better. Their respect meant more than Dad's approval ever had. 3 months later, I landed my first major client. A local restaurant chain needed a complete website overhaul, and they chose my proposal over two established agencies. The contract was worth more than I had made in the previous 6 months combined. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I called Dad immediately, hoping this would finally prove I was serious. Maybe he would see that his son wasn't just playing with computers anymore. His response crushed that hope instantly. "Beginner's luck," he said with a dismissive chuckle. "You'll mess it up somehow. They always do." That night, staring at the signed contract on my desk, I realized something that changed everything. He didn't want me to succeed. He wanted me to need him. My failure validated his importance, his role as the successful one in the family. My success threatened that dynamic, and he would rather tear me down than share the spotlight. The contract felt heavier in my hands as this truth settled in. I wasn't just fighting for business success anymore. I was fighting for my right to exist independent of his shadow. The public golf course became my refuge. After long days of coding and client meetings, I would hit a bucket of balls as the sun set, trying to work out my frustration. The course was nothing like Willowbrook, with its perfectly manicured greens and exclusive membership. This was where regular people played, where a good shot mattered more than your bank account. That's where I met Frank Rodriguez, a retired golf pro who worked part-time at the course. He noticed me struggling with my swing and offered some tips. But our conversations quickly moved beyond golf technique to business philosophy. "Your dad's playing the wrong game," he said one evening, watching me line up a putt. "He's focused on keeping others down instead of building himself up." Frank became the mentor I had always wanted. He taught me that success wasn't about dominating others, but about creating value. "Focus on your own swing," he would say. "Let the scorecard take care of itself." His lessons extended far beyond golf. He showed me that real strength came from lifting others up, not pushing them down. Every evening spent with Frank felt like healing from years of toxic competition. Just when things seemed to be falling into place, disaster struck. My biggest client, the restaurant chain, suddenly pulled out of our contract. Their corporate headquarters had decided to handle all marketing internally, leaving me with a half-finished project and no payment. The financial hit was devastating, but the emotional damage was worse. Dad's voice echoed in my head. "Told you so." For a moment, I considered calling him, admitting defeat, asking for help. The warehouse was hiring full-time, and I could probably get my old job back. It would be so much easier to give up, to accept that maybe he was right all along. But something Frank had said stopped me. Golf is about the next shot, not the last one. I spent the weekend updating my portfolio, reaching out to new prospects, and reminding myself that one setback didn't erase months of progress. By Monday morning, I was back to pitching clients with renewed determination. The rejection stung, but it also showed me something important. I wasn't the same person who had crumbled under Dad's criticism. I had developed resilience, the kind that comes from surviving on your own terms. The silence between Dad and me stretched into a full year. Birthdays came and went without acknowledgement. Thanksgiving dinner was awkward, with Mom trying to play peacemaker while we sat at opposite ends of the table. Christmas was worse, with presents exchanged politely but without warmth. The silence hurt more than his criticism had. At least when he was mocking me, he was paying attention. Now I felt invisible, like I had been erased from his life completely. But there was also something peaceful about it. No more constant judgment, no more waiting for his approval that never came. My business continued to grow during this quiet period. Without the distraction of family drama, I could focus entirely on building something real. I moved into a better apartment, bought a reliable car, and started putting money into savings. The silence was painful, but it was also productive. I discovered who I was when I wasn't trying to impress or rebel against anyone. The freedom was intoxicating, even if it came with the price of loneliness. Some evenings, I would drive past his house, wondering if he ever thought about me too. The local entrepreneur meetup group became my new family. These were people who understood the struggles of building something from nothing, who celebrated small wins and offered support during setbacks. For the first time in my life, I experienced what healthy mentorship looked like. Amanda Martinez ran a successful marketing agency and took me under her wing. Unlike Dad, she shared knowledge freely, connected me with potential clients, and offered honest feedback without the emotional manipulation. Success isn't a competition, she explained during one of our coffee meetings. When one of us wins, we all win. The group met monthly at a local coffee shop, and I never missed a meeting. These people became my board of directors, my cheerleaders, and my reality check all rolled into one. They saw potential in me that my own father couldn't recognize, and their support filled a void I didn't even know existed. We shared failures as openly as successes, creating a safe space where vulnerability was strength, not weakness. The contrast with my family dynamic was stark and healing. Here, asking for help was seen as smart, not weak. Rumors started circulating that Willowbrook Country Club was in serious financial trouble. The old money membership was aging out, and younger professionals were choosing more modern facilities. The club's board was reportedly considering selling to developers who would turn the historic course into condominiums. I heard about it through Frank, who had connections throughout the local golf community. Shame to see a place like that go under, he said, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. Though I suppose it would make a good investment opportunity for the right buyer. The idea hit me like lightning. I started researching the club's financials, studying their membership trends, and calculating what it would take to turn the operation around. It wasn't revenge I was planning, just good business. But the irony wasn't lost on me that the place where Dad had humiliated me might become my greatest opportunity. The more I studied the numbers, the more convinced I became that this could work. The club had solid bones, just outdated management, and an inflexible approach to membership. With the right vision, it could be transformed into something truly special. I assembled a group of investors from my entrepreneur network, each bringing different skills and resources to the table. Amanda handled the marketing projections, another member was a lawyer who specialized in business acquisitions, and a third was a golf course designer who saw potential in modernizing the facilities. Our bid was competitive but not excessive. We presented a comprehensive plan for revitalizing the club while maintaining its historic character. The board voted unanimously to accept our offer. As I signed the papers, my hands shook slightly. Whether from nerves or excitement, I couldn't tell. The same clubhouse where Dad had mocked me in front of his friends was now partly mine. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. But this wasn't about revenge, I told myself. This was about building something better, something that would serve the community instead of just the privileged few. Walking through the empty clubhouse after the closing, I felt a strange mix of vindication and responsibility. The place held so much history, both personal and communal. Now it was up to us to write the next chapter. The weight of ownership was heavier than I had expected, but it was a good kind of heavy. Our first board meeting focused on necessary improvements. The clubhouse needed updating, the course required maintenance, and the membership policies needed to be more inclusive. After reviewing the budget, we voted to close the club for 1 week to complete the most urgent renovations. It was a purely business decision, but I knew it would affect Dad's routine. He played every Sunday morning with the same group of men, had done so for nearly 15 years. The timing wasn't intentional, but it wasn't accidental either. Sometimes business decisions have personal consequences. I signed the closure notice with steady hands, knowing that this was just the beginning. We were going to transform this place from an exclusive retreat for the wealthy into a community asset that welcomed everyone. The work would be hard, but the vision was clear. As I watched the contractors arrive to begin the renovations, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. This was about creating something better, something that would last. The old guard would have to adapt or find somewhere else to play. Change was coming, whether they liked it or not. The phone rang on Saturday evening. Dad's voice was sharp with anger, demanding to know why his club was closed. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I've been a member for 20 years. You can't just shut down without notice." I kept my voice calm and professional. The club underwent a change in ownership. We're making necessary improvements to ensure the facility meets modern standards. All members were notified by mail 2 weeks ago. "You don't understand," he continued. "I have important people coming tomorrow. This is embarrassing." That's when I couldn't resist. "I'm running a business now, not a playground." And I hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat in my apartment, staring at the phone, wondering if I had just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But then I remembered his words on the golf course, the laughter of his friends, the year of silence. Maybe it was time he learned what consequence felt like. The power dynamic had shifted, and we both knew it. For the first time in my life, I was the one setting the rules. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Guilt crept in over the following days. Had I become as cold and calculating as him? Frank noticed my mood during our regular evening practice session. "You're swinging angry," he observed. "That never leads anywhere good." I explained the situation, expecting him to either congratulate me or criticize my methods. Instead, he asked a simple question: "Did you make the decision for the right reasons?" The club genuinely needed renovations, the closure was legitimate, and the timing was coincidental. But my satisfaction with Dad's inconvenience felt petty. "Leadership means making tough calls," Frank said. "But it also means checking your motives. Are you building something better, or just tearing someone down?" His words stuck with me as I watched the construction crews work on the clubhouse. I wanted to believe I was building something better, but the line between justice and revenge felt thinner than I had expected. The next few days would test whether I could lead with integrity or if I would become everything I had fought against. The responsibility of ownership was teaching me lessons I hadn't expected to learn. Reopening day arrived with perfect weather. The clubhouse looked spectacular, the course was in excellent condition, and our new staff was eager to welcome members back. I was reviewing final details when I saw a familiar figure walking alone toward the first tee. Dad stood there without his usual entourage, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. He carried his golf bag with the same careful precision, but his shoulders seemed more stooped. This wasn't the confident man who had humiliated me a year ago. This was someone who had been forced to confront a changed world. I watched him from the clubhouse window, wondering if I should approach him or let him play in peace. The choice was taken from me when he looked up and saw me watching. Our eyes met across the distance, and I knew this confrontation was inevitable. The moment felt charged with everything we had never said to each other, all the hurt and pride and stubbornness that had built up over the years. He nodded slightly, a gesture that could have meant anything. I nodded back, accepting whatever was about to happen. I grabbed my clubs and walked out to meet him. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He nodded silently, and we walked to the first tee together. The morning was quiet except for the sound of our footsteps on the cart path. We played 9 holes without discussing business, the club, or our year of silence. Just golf. He offered tips on my swing. I complimented his putting, and for brief moments, it felt like we were just two people who happened to share a love of the game. The tension was still there, but it felt less sharp somehow. His game was solid, though not as commanding as I remembered. My own play had improved significantly from all those evenings with Frank. We were more evenly matched than ever before, and I could see him noticing the difference. For the first time in our relationship, we were playing as equals rather than father and disappointing son. The scorecard didn't matter as much as the quiet respect we were showing each other's shots. It felt like a conversation we had never been able to have with words, conducted entirely through the language of golf. At the clubhouse afterward, we sat at the bar overlooking the 18th green. The silence stretched between us until he finally spoke. "I underestimated you," he said quietly, not looking at me directly. "This place looks better than it has in years." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he had ever come to admitting he was wrong. I could see the struggle in his face, the difficulty of acknowledging that his son had succeeded without his help. The pride and stubbornness that had defined our relationship for so long were still there, but they seemed less important now. "Thank you," I said simply. The compliment meant more than I expected it to, but I didn't want to make a bigger deal of it than necessary. We sat in comfortable silence, watching other golfers finish their rounds. For the first time in years, being in his presence didn't feel like a battle. The renovations had transformed more than just the physical space. Something between us had shifted too, subtle but unmistakable. We were learning to see each other as people rather than just roles we had been forced to play. As we prepared to leave, he stood up and extended his hand. "I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished here." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge we could choose to cross or ignore. I shook his hand and smiled. "I don't need your approval anymore, Dad, but I appreciate you saying it." The honesty of the statement surprised us both. A year ago, his approval was all I wanted. Now it felt like a nice bonus rather than a desperate need. "I guess you proved me wrong," he said, and there was something that might have been respect in his voice. You didn't need me after all. No, I agreed. But maybe that's okay. Maybe you taught me something valuable by being the obstacle I had to overcome. We parted that day with a handshake and a mutual understanding that our relationship had fundamentally changed. The dynamic had shifted from father and dependent son to two adults who could respect each other's accomplishments. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. For the first time in years, we had found a way to coexist without constant conflict. Over the following months, the club transformed into something neither of us had envisioned. We opened membership to a more diverse group of people, added family-friendly programs, and partnered with local schools for junior golf instruction. What had once been Dad's exclusive playground became a community gathering place. The financial turnaround was dramatic. Younger members joined in record numbers, corporate events booked solid, and the restaurant became a popular destination even for non-golfers. Our inclusive approach had done more than just survive. It had thrived beyond our wildest projections. Dad continued to play his Sunday rounds, but now he was sharing the course with teachers, small business owners, and families who had never belonged to a country club before. I watched him adapt to the changes with grudging respect. He was still the same man, but he was learning to play in a different world. The club had become a symbol of what was possible when you focused on building up rather than keeping others out. The old exclusivity had been replaced by something more valuable: genuine community. A letter arrived from Mom on a Tuesday morning. Her handwriting was careful and deliberate, the way she wrote when she had something important to say. "I've watched you both struggle with pride and stubbornness," she wrote. "But what you've built at that club is something special. You've done what your father couldn't, created something that serves others instead of just yourself." The letter continued with observations about our family dynamics that were both painful and insightful. She had been caught in the middle of our conflict for too long, playing peacemaker when what we both needed was honest confrontation. Her approval meant more than Dad's because it came without agenda or manipulation. "Your father talks about you now," she wrote in closing. "Not to your face, because that would require him to admit he was wrong, but to others. He's proud, even if he can't say it directly." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer, a reminder that healing sometimes happens in unexpected ways. Mom had always been the emotional intelligence of our family, seeing patterns that Dad and I were too stubborn to recognize. Her words carried the weight of truth that we had both been avoiding. Just as our relationship seemed to be stabilizing, a new challenge emerged. Harrison Development Group, a major real estate company, made an aggressive offer to buy the club. Their plan was to tear down the historic clubhouse and build luxury condominiums on the golf course. The offer was substantial, enough to make several board members seriously consider it. But accepting would mean destroying everything we had built, turning a community asset back into a commodity for the wealthy. I found myself in the position of having to fight for something I had barely gotten used to owning. The battle was intense, but different from my conflict with Dad. This was about building alliances, presenting alternative visions, and convincing people that some things were worth more than their immediate cash value. I was fighting for the club's soul, not just its ownership. The irony wasn't lost on me that now I was the one defending tradition and community values against pure profit motive. The lessons Frank had taught me about building up rather than tearing down became my guiding philosophy throughout the struggle. Instead of trying to outbid Harrison directly, I proposed a different strategy. We would form partnerships with 3 smaller golf courses in the area, sharing resources and creating a network that could compete with the big corporate facilities. It was about building up rather than tearing down. The plan worked beautifully. Our member base expanded, operational costs decreased through shared services, and we created a model that other community-owned clubs began to emulate. Harrison withdrew their offer when they realized the club was no longer a distressed asset they could exploit. The victory felt different from my earlier success. This wasn't about proving Dad wrong or showing that I could succeed without him. This was about protecting something valuable and creating lasting change. The motivation was pure and the satisfaction was deeper. The collaborative approach had taught me that true strength came from building networks, not fighting battles alone. Even some of Dad's old friends began to respect what we had accomplished, seeing that change didn't have to mean destruction. The club had become a case study in how to modernize without losing your soul. A few weeks later, I overheard Dad talking to one of his golf buddies in the pro shop. My son owns this place, he was saying with unmistakable pride. Turned it around completely. Smartest business decision I've seen in years. He didn't know I was listening, which made the compliment even more meaningful. Later, when we crossed paths on the course, he didn't mention what I had heard. But there was something different in his demeanor, a subtle shift that suggested the walls between us were finally coming down. He was learning to be proud of me publicly, even if he couldn't say it directly to my face. The change was gradual, but noticeable. He started asking about my other business ventures, offering advice that was actually helpful rather than condescending. We were finding our way towards something that resembled a normal father-son relationship, built on mutual respect rather than dependence. The golf course had become neutral ground where we could meet as equals, leaving our old baggage in the clubhouse. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Sometimes the most meaningful victories are the quiet ones that happen over time. One evening, as we finished a round together, Dad stopped on the 18th green and looked out over the course. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Other golfers were finishing their rounds. Families were having dinner on the clubhouse patio, and the place felt alive in a way it never had before. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent so many years worried about you needing me that I never stopped to think about whether I needed you." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. Maybe I was wrong about that. Maybe I needed you to succeed more than you needed me to help. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from him, and it was enough. We stood there in the fading light, two men who had finally learned to respect each other's games. The competition between us wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something healthier, something that pushed us both to be better rather than tearing each other down. The golf course stretched out before us, a testament to what was possible when you focused on building rather than destroying. In that moment, I understood that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing to write a different future. Standing on that green, I realized this story was never really about beating Dad or proving him wrong. It was about finding my own game, my own way of defining success. The golf club had been the catalyst, but the real victory was learning to play by my own rules. I had spent so many years seeking his approval, then rebelling against his disapproval, that I had forgotten to ask myself what I actually wanted. The business, the club, the community we had built, these were all expressions of values I had discovered independent of his influence. The boy who had been humiliated on the ninth hole was gone, replaced by a man who understood that success wasn't about domination or revenge. It was about creating value, building something lasting, and finding peace with the people who had shaped you, even when that shaping was painful. Dad and I would never have a perfect relationship, but we had found something workable, something based on mutual respect rather than need or resentment. And as we walked off that green together, I knew that this was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The game had taught us both that the real victory wasn't in beating your opponent, but in playing with honor and finding a way to respect the competition. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. We've got more interesting stories for you.